It was a bright, sunny Saturday morning. The sky was blue, the birds were chirping, and 12-year-old Timmy Jackson was bouncing around in his backyard with a huge smile on his face. Why was he so happy? Well, Timmy had just finished building his very first bird feeder. It wasn't anything super fancy, no shiny bells or sparkly decorations. It was just some old wood he found in the garage, a handful of nails, and a little roof he painted bright red with some paint he borrowed from his mom. To Timmy, though, it looked like the best thing ever. He stood back, hands on his hips, and stared at it with big, proud eyes. He could already imagine all the birds that would come visit, little sparrows, blue jays, maybe even a cardinal if he got lucky. Timmy grabbed a ladder from the shed and climbed up to hang his bird feeder on the big oak tree right by the fence. The tree was tall and strong, with thick branches that stretched out like arms ready to hold his creation. He tied it up with some string, made sure it wouldn't fall, and then jumped down to admire it again. Perfect, he whispered to himself. He pictured birds landing on it, pecking at the seeds he'd pour in later. Maybe they'd chirp a little thank you just for him. It was his special project, something he'd worked on all by himself, and he couldn't wait to see it come to life. But here's the thing, nobody knew it yet, not even Timmy, but that little bird feeder was about to cause a big, crazy mess. It wasn't just a bird feeder anymore. Oh no, it was about to start a war with yelling, police cars, and a twist so wild it would make your jaw drop. How could something so small and simple turn into such a huge deal? Well, you'll see soon enough. Let's just say Timmy's quiet Saturday was about to get a whole lot louder. Now, let's talk about the person who was going to make all this trouble happen. Across the street from Timmy's house lived a lady named Karen Miller. If you've ever had a grumpy neighbor who watches everything you do, then you know exactly what Karen was like. She was the kind of person who always had her nose pressed against her window, peeking out from behind her curtains, looking for something to complain about. A bike left on the lawn? She'd huff and puff. Kids playing too loud? She'd march outside and tell them to hush. To Karen, her neighborhood was supposed to be perfect like a picture in a magazine, and she didn't like anything or anyone messing it up. To Karen, Timmy was just a noisy kid who didn't fit in with her idea of a perfect street. She'd seen him running around before, laughing with his friends or kicking a soccer ball, and every time she'd frown and mutter to herself. "That boy is too loud," she'd say. "He doesn't belong here." She didn't know Timmy very well, didn't even try to, but she'd already decided he was trouble. That bird feeder? The second she spotted it from her window, her eyes narrowed. She didn't like it one bit. It wasn't neat or fancy enough for her perfect little world. To her, it was just a sloppy pile of wood stuck on a tree, and she was sure it broke some kind of rule. But here's the fun part, Karen had no idea who Timmy really was. She thought he was just some regular kid, maybe a little annoying, maybe a little messy. She didn't know there was something special about him, something she'd never guess in a million years. Timmy wasn't just a boy with a bird feeder. Nope, he had a secret so cool it would flip everything upside down. What was it? Oh, I can't tell you yet. That would ruin the surprise. Let's just say Karen was about to learn that judging people too fast can get you into some serious trouble. So, picture this, Timmy's standing there in his backyard, staring up at his bird feeder with a big grin. The sun's shining, the breeze is blowing, and everything feels calm and happy. Across the street, Karen's glaring out her window, already planning how she's going to get rid of that ugly thing on the tree. Two totally different worlds, right? One's full of excitement and dreams, and the other's full of grumbles and rules. What's going to happen when those worlds crash into each other? Will Karen ruin Timmy's big moment, or is something way bigger about to go down? Think about it for a second. Have you ever made something you were really proud of, like a drawing or a fort, and then someone came along and said it was no good? How did that feel? Timmy was about to find out what that's like, but he wasn't going to let it stop him. Nope, not Timmy. He might look like a regular kid with dirt on his sneakers and a goofy smile, but there was more to him than met the eye. Karen thought she had all the power, but she was in for a shock. Let's set the scene a little more. Timmy's house was a cozy little place with a red door and a patchy lawn. His mom was inside, probably making lunch, maybe peanut butter sandwiches, his favorite. The backyard wasn't huge, but it had that big oak tree, a rusty swing set, and a spot where Timmy liked to dig for worms. It was his space, his little corner of the world. Across the street, Karen's house was the opposite. It was super neat, with trimmed bushes and a shiny mailbox that looked like it got polished every day. Everything about it screamed rules and don't touch. Two houses, two people, two totally different ways of seeing things. By now, you're probably wondering, what's going to happen next? Will Karen storm over and yell at Timmy? Will she call someone to take that bird feeder down? Or is Timmy hiding something so awesome that it'll turn the whole day into a giant adventure? I'll give you a tiny hint, it's not just about the bird feeder. There's something else going on, something sneaky and exciting, and it's going to make the story way more fun than you think. By Monday afternoon, Karen Miller had had enough. The weekend was over, and she couldn't stop thinking about that bird feeder hanging on Timmy's tree. To her, it wasn't just a little wooden box with a red roof, it was like a big, ugly monster staring at her from across the street. She hated it. Every time she looked out her window, there it was, ruining her perfect view of the neighborhood. She'd spent all Sunday grumbling about it, and now she was done waiting. She grabbed her phone, threw on her slippers, and marched right across the street to Timmy's house, ready to make a fuss. Timmy's mom was outside, watering her flowers with a green hose. The water made little rainbows in the sunlight, and she was humming a happy tune. She didn't see Karen coming until the angry lady was right in front of her, pointing at the bird feeder like it had just insulted her. "That thing's an eyesore," Karen snapped, her voice loud and sharp. "It looks awful, and it's against HOA rules. I'm giving you until tomorrow to take it down, or I'm calling the cops." Timmy's mom stopped watering and blinked, surprised. She didn't know what to say. The HOA? Cops? Over a bird feeder? It sounded crazy to her, but Karen's face was red and serious, so she knew this wasn't a joke. Timmy was sitting on the porch, just a few steps away. He'd been reading a comic book, but when he heard Karen's loud voice, he looked up. His ears caught every word she said, and his eyes followed her as she waved her phone around like a weapon. Most kids would have been scared. Maybe they'd run inside or start crying, begging their mom to fix it. But not Timmy. Nope. He didn't move. He didn't say a single word. He just sat there, watching Karen with his eyes narrowed, like a cat watching a mouse. Something about the way he stared made you think he wasn't afraid at all. It was almost like he was planning something. Karen didn't notice Timmy's look. She was too busy yelling. After she finished telling Timmy's mom off, she turned around and stomped back to her house. Her slippers slapped the pavement with every step, and her voice echoed down the street as she pressed her phone to her ear. She was already dialing 911. "Yes, officer," she barked into the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need help. There's a structure over here violating code. It's breaking the rules, and it's got to go." She sounded so sure of herself, like she was the queen of the neighborhood and nobody could stop her. Timmy's mom stood there, still holding the hose. Water dripped onto her shoes, but she didn't care. She sighed and shook her head. "Silly neighbor fight," she muttered to herself. To her, this was just Karen being Karen, grumpy and loud, like always. She figured it would blow over, like when Karen complained about the mailbox being too rusty or the grass being too long. She didn't think it was a big deal. After all, it was just a bird feeder Timmy made. How could that cause so much trouble? She turned off the hose and went back to her flowers, hoping Karen would calm down by tomorrow. But Timmy? He wasn't like his mom. He didn't think this was silly or small. He stayed on the porch, his comic book forgotten on his lap. That smirk crept onto his face again, a tiny, sneaky smile that made him look like he knew something nobody else did. What was it? Why wasn't he worried? Most kids would be freaking out if someone threatened to call the police on their project. They'd be sad or mad, maybe even scared of getting in trouble. But Timmy's smirk said something different. It said, "Go ahead, Karen. Try it." It was the kind of look that made you wonder, what was he hiding? Did he have a trick up his sleeve? Let's think about this for a second. Karen was acting like the bird feeder was the worst thing ever. To her, it wasn't just ugly, it was against the rules. She loved rules. Her house was full of them, no toys on the lawn, no loud noises, no messy stuff anywhere. She even had a little sign in her yard that said, "Keep off the grass." To her, Timmy's bird feeder was like a big, red flag waving in her face, saying, "I don't care about your rules." And Karen couldn't stand that. She wanted it gone, and she was ready to bring in the police to make it happen. She thought she was in charge, the boss of everything. But Timmy wasn't backing down. That smirk of his, it was like a secret weapon. You could tell he wasn't just going to let Karen win. Maybe he knew something about the bird feeder that she didn't. Maybe it wasn't just a bunch of wood and nails. What if it was more important than anyone thought? Karen saw it as junk, but what if Timmy saw it as something special? The way he watched her stomp away, the way he didn't even flinch when she said cops, it made you feel like he had a plan. A good one. Picture the scene: Karen's back in her house now, pacing around her perfect living room with her perfect curtains and perfect couch. She's talking to the 911 lady, telling her all about the structure that's ruining her day. Outside, Timmy's mom is still shaking her head, thinking Karen's being ridiculous. And there's Timmy, sitting on the porch with that little smirk, like he's the only one who knows how this story's going to end. The air feels tense, like something big is about to happen. You can almost hear a drum beat in the background, boom, 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 building up to something exciting. What did Timmy know that Karen didn't? Was he just pretending to be brave, or did he really have something up his sleeve? Karen thought she had all the power with her phone and her rules, but Timmy's quiet confidence made you wonder who was really in control. Was this going to be a fight about a bird feeder, or was it going to turn into something way bigger? Something that would make Karen wish she'd never opened her mouth? Think about it. Have you ever had someone try to boss you around, but you knew you had a secret they didn't? Maybe you let them talk and talk, but inside, you were smiling because you knew you'd win in the end. That's what Timmy was like right now. Karen was loud and angry, but Timmy was calm and sneaky. Who do you think was going to come out on top? Stick around, because this fight was just getting started, and it was about to get wild. The next day came fast. It was Tuesday morning, and Karen Miller wasn't messing around. She'd promised to call the police, and that's exactly what she did. Around lunchtime, a police car rolled down the street, its red and blue lights flashing bright. It stopped right in front of Timmy's house, tires crunching on the gravel. Karen stood on her lawn across the street, arms crossed tight over her chest. She had a big, smug smile on her face, like she'd already won a prize. To her, this was it, the moment that ugly bird feeder would finally disappear, and she'd be the hero of the neighborhood. The car door opened, and out stepped a police officer. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a serious look on his face. His uniform was dark blue, and he had a shiny badge pinned to his chest. He adjusted his hat, glanced around, and then started walking straight toward the big oak tree where Timmy's bird feeder hung. The red roof gleamed in the sunlight, looking small and harmless, but Karen acted like it was a giant problem. Timmy's mom heard the car and rushed outside, still holding a dish towel from the kitchen. Her eyes got wide when she saw the officer. "Officer," she said, her voice shaking. "It's just a kid's project. It's not hurting anybody." The officer didn't say anything at first. He just kept walking, his boots thumping on the grass. He stopped under the tree and tilted his head up to look at the bird feeder. He squinted, like he was trying to figure out what all the fuss was about. Timmy's mom stood there, twisting the towel in her hands. She didn't understand why a police car was here for something so silly. She thought Karen was being ridiculous, but now she was a little worried. What if they really had to take it down? What if Timmy got upset? But Timmy? He wasn't worried at all. Nope, not one bit. While his mom was talking fast and Karen was smirking, Timmy strolled out of the house like it was no big deal. He had his hands stuffed in his pockets, and his sneakers scuffed the ground as he walked into the yard. He didn't run or yell or cry. He just stood there, calm as could be, watching the officer with those same narrowed eyes from yesterday. Too calm, maybe. Most kids would be nervous seeing a police officer looking at their stuff, but Timmy acted like he'd seen this all before. What was going on in that head of his? Karen couldn't keep quiet. She shouted from her lawn, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "See? It's ugly and illegal," she yelled, pointing at the bird feeder like it was a crime scene. "It breaks the rules. It's got to go." Her voice was sharp, and she nodded to herself, sure the officer would agree with her. She thought she'd won already. To her, the bird feeder was a messy, awful thing that didn't belong in her perfect world. She'd been waiting for this moment, dreaming of the day she'd get rid of it and prove she was right. The officer didn't answer Karen right away. He scratched his head, his fingers brushing under his hat. He looked at the bird feeder again, up at the red roof, down at the wooden sides, over at the string holding it to the branch. It didn't look dangerous or fancy or anything special. It just looked like something a kid made. He turned to Timmy, who was standing there all quiet and cool. "You built this, kid?" the officer asked, his voice deep but not mean. Timmy nodded, kicking a little pebble with his shoe. "Yup," he said simply. "Took me all weekend." That's when things got interesting. Karen was too busy shouting to notice, but there was something funny going on. The officer didn't just nod and walk away. He didn't tell Timmy to take it down or scold him. Instead, he gave Timmy a quick glance, a little look that was more than just a regular look. It was the kind of glance you give someone you already know, like a secret handshake with your eyes. Timmy didn't flinch. He just stared back, that tiny smirk tugging at his lips again. What was that about? Did they know each other? How could they? Karen didn't see it. She was too caught up in her victory dance over on her lawn. She kept talking, even though nobody was really listening. "It's against HOA rules," she said again. "I told them yesterday it had to go. This is my neighborhood, and I won't have junk like that ruining it." She thought the officer was there because of her call, because she'd made a big deal out of it. She didn't stop to wonder why he wasn't yelling at Timmy or ripping the bird feeder down right away. She didn't notice the way he tilted his head at Timmy, like he was curious or impressed. Timmy's mom was still trying to explain. "It's just wood and nails," she said to the officer. "He worked so hard on it. It's not bothering anyone." She sounded desperate now, like she wanted to protect Timmy's feelings. She didn't want him to lose his project over Karen's complaining. But the officer just held up a hand, telling her to wait. He wasn't mad, and he wasn't in a hurry. He kept looking at Timmy, then back at the bird feeder, like he was putting pieces of a puzzle together in his head. "Let's think about this for a minute." Karen thought she had everything under control. She'd called the police, and now they were here, right? She was sure they'd take her side and make Timmy's bird feeder disappear. She'd been mad about it since Saturday, and she wasn't going to let it stay up one more day. But Timmy wasn't acting like a kid in trouble. He wasn't scared or sad. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, watching everything like it was a show on TV. And that glance from the officer, what did it mean? Did Timmy have a secret friend in the police? Was there more to this bird feeder than anyone knew? Something was definitely up. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming, but not the rainy kind. It was the kind of storm where surprises pop out and make you go, whoa. Karen didn't see it yet, but things were about to get good. Really good. The officer's badge glinted in the sun, and Timmy's smirk grew just a tiny bit bigger. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to end the way Karen thought. She'd walked right into something bigger than her rules and her phone calls, and she didn't even know it. Right when things were getting tense, something wild happened. A big, shiny black SUV zoomed up and parked right behind the police car. It wasn't loud or noisy like the police car with its flashing lights. This SUV was quiet and sneaky, with dark windows you couldn't see through. Everyone turned to look, even Karen, who was still standing on her lawn with her arms crossed. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman. She wasn't dressed like a regular person, no jeans or sneakers for her. She wore a sharp, fancy suit, all black and crisp, like someone important from a movie. She held a clipboard tight in her hands, and her shoes clicked on the pavement as she walked fast toward the officer. Karen's mouth fell open. "Who's that?" she muttered, her voice low and confused. She didn't know what was happening, and for the first time, she didn't look so smug. Her eyes got wide, and she took a tiny step back, like maybe she wasn't the boss anymore. The woman didn't even glance at Karen. She marched straight up to the tall officer, who was still standing by Timmy's bird feeder. "Sergeant," she said in a clear, strong voice, "is this the spot?" The officer nodded, his serious face breaking into a little smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Kid's a genius." Timmy's mom stopped twisting her dish towel and stared. Karen blinked fast, like she couldn't believe her ears. "A genius? Timmy? The noisy kid from across the street?" No way. But Timmy didn't look surprised at all. He just stepped forward, calm as ever, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small card. It was about the size of a baseball card, with some writing on it. He handed it to the woman in the suit, who took it and read it carefully. Her eyes lit up, and a big smile spread across her face. She looked at Timmy like he was the coolest kid she'd ever met. "Timothy Jackson," she said, reading the card out loud. "Junior Wildlife Scout." She paused, then looked up at everyone watching. "Your bird feeder's been tracking endangered sparrows for us." The words hung in the air like a big, exciting secret finally let out of the bag. Timmy's mom gasped. Karen's face went from red to pale, then back to red again. Endangered sparrows? Tracking? What did that even mean? The woman kept talking, turning to Karen with a sharp look. "And you just called 911 on a government project." Boom. That was it, the big twist nobody saw coming. Karen's jaw dropped so low it almost hit the grass. She stammered, trying to say something, but no words came out. Her phone slipped a little in her hand, like she forgot she was holding it. The officer chuckled a low, rumbling laugh that made his shoulders shake. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "I was already here to check on my nephew's work. You just made this a lot more interesting." Nephew? Wait a minute, the officer was Timmy's uncle? Now it all made sense. That sneaky glance earlier, the way Timmy wasn't scared, it was because he knew the officer all along. Let's break this down. Timmy wasn't just a regular kid with a bird feeder. Nope, he was a junior wildlife scout, which is like a super cool club for kids who help animals. That bird feeder he made? It wasn't just for fun or to look pretty. It was special, a secret tool to watch rare birds called endangered sparrows. Those are birds that don't have many friends left in the world, and people like Timmy help keep track of them to make sure they're safe. The government, the big bosses who run things, knew about it. They wanted Timmy to do this. And the woman in the suit? She was probably one of those bosses, here to check on his awesome work. Karen, though. She had no clue. All this time, she thought the bird feeder was junk, something ugly that broke her precious rules. She'd been so mad, stomping around and calling the police, thinking she'd win. But now, she looked like she wanted to disappear. Her big plan to get rid of the bird feeder had backfired in the best way possible. Instead of being the hero, she'd accidentally picked a fight with something way bigger than her, a government project. Her face was as red as Timmy's bird feeder roof, and she couldn't even yell anymore. She just stood there, frozen, while everyone else tried not to laugh. Timmy's uncle, the officer, grinned at his nephew. "Good job, Timmy," he said, giving him a little nod. Timmy smiled back, not too big, just enough to show he was proud. His mom ran over and hugged him tight. "You little sneak," she said, laughing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Timmy shrugged. "It was a secret," he said simply. He'd been so quiet about it, letting Karen think she was in charge, when really, he was the one with the power all along. Think about it for a second. Karen had been so sure she was right. She'd called 911, thinking the police would come and tear down that ugly bird feeder. But the officer wasn't there because of her, he was there to check on Timmy's project. And that fancy lady in the suit? She wasn't some random person. She was part of the team that knew Timmy was doing something amazing. The bird feeder wasn't breaking rules, it was helping the world. Karen's big, loud complaint had turned into a giant oops, and now she was the one who looked silly. The neighbors who'd peeked out their windows started whispering. Some giggled, some clapped. Timmy's bird feeder wasn't just staying up, it was a star now. And Karen? She'd accidentally made it famous. The woman in the suit tucked her clipboard under her arm and looked at Karen again. "Next time," she said, "maybe ask before you call the police." Her voice wasn't mean, but it was firm, like a teacher telling you to sit down and be quiet. Karen nodded fast, still too shocked to argue. This was the big moment, the part where everything flipped upside down. Timmy wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a hero, a smart little scout who'd outsmarted Karen without even trying. His uncle patted him on the back, proud as could be. The bird feeder swung gently on the tree, looking prouder too, like it knew it was special. And Karen? She'd learned the hard way that sometimes, the things you think are problems are actually treasures in disguise. Karen stood there, her face still red, trying to find something to say. But it's ugly," she finally blurted out, pointing at Timmy's bird feeder like it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. She didn't want to give up, even now. But the woman in the sharp suit, the one from the black SUV, just shook her head. "It's staying," she said firmly, her voice calm but strong. "And next time, check your facts before wasting police time." That shut Karen up fast. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, looking like a fish out of water. She didn't have any more arguments left. The officer, Timmy's uncle, smiled at Timmy and tipped his hat, like cowboys do in old movies. "Good job, kid," he said, his deep voice full of pride. "Keep it up." Timmy nodded back, his grin getting a little bigger. He didn't say much, but you could tell he was happy. His bird feeder wasn't just safe, it was a hero now, and so was he. Karen didn't know what to do. She looked at the woman, then at the officer, then at Timmy, and finally at all the neighbors who'd come outside to watch. Her big plan had fallen apart, and she didn't like it one bit. She turned around, her slippers dragging on the ground, and slinked back to her house across the street. She didn't stomp this time. She didn't yell. She just shuffled away, her head down, like a dog who'd been caught chewing a shoe. The fight was over, and she'd lost. As Karen disappeared into her perfect little house, something cool happened. The neighbors who'd been peeking out their windows or standing on their porches started clapping. It started small, just a few hands, but then more joined in, and soon it was a big, loud cheer. They weren't clapping for Karen, oh no. They were clapping for Timmy. His mom ran over and hugged him so tight he almost fell over. "You little sneak," she whispered in his ear, laughing as she squeezed him. "Why didn't you tell me about all this?" Timmy just shrugged and grinned. "It was a secret," he said, like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. That bird feeder, the one Karen hated so much, wasn't going anywhere. It was staying right there on the big oak tree, with its red roof shining in the sun. And now everyone knew the truth. Timmy wasn't just some kid with a hammer and some nails. He was smart, brave, and part of something important. He'd tricked Karen without even trying, and he'd won the day. The neighbors kept smiling and talking as they went back to their houses. Timmy's mom let go of him and ruffled his hair. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her eyes all shiny. Timmy looked up at his bird feeder, still swinging gently on the branch. It didn't look like junk anymore, it looked like a prize. And Karen? She'd have to find something else to complain about, because this battle was done. Justice was served, and Timmy was the star. So, there you have it, friends. A boy, a bird feeder, and a nosy neighbor who learned her lesson the hard way. Timmy started with just a little wooden box he made all by himself, something small and simple that he loved. But it turned into a huge surprise that nobody saw coming, not even Karen, who thought she knew everything. That bird feeder wasn't just a kid's project. It was a secret mission to help rare birds, and it showed everyone that sometimes the tiniest things can be the biggest deals. Isn't that cool? Think about it for a minute. Karen was so sure she was in charge. She had her rules, her phone, and her loud voice, and she thought that made her the boss. She looked at Timmy and saw just a kid, someone she could boss around and scare with her big complaints. But she was wrong. Timmy was quiet, but he was smart and strong in his own way. He didn't need to yell or fight back right away. He just waited, and when the truth came out, it was Karen who looked silly, not him. People who think they're the smartest in the room. They might find out they're not as clever as they think. This story makes you wonder, doesn't it? Sometimes we see people or things and decide they're not important. Maybe it's a kid with messy hair, or a toy that doesn't look fancy, or even a little idea that seems too small to matter. But Timmy showed us that you can't always tell what's big or special just by looking at it. The quiet ones, the small ones, the ones who don't brag, they might be hiding something amazing. And when they show it, wow, it can change everything. What about you, friends? Have you ever underestimated someone who proved you wrong? Maybe it was a friend who turned out to be super good at something, like drawing or running fast. Or maybe it was someone quiet who surprised you with a big idea. I bet you've got a story like that. Tell me about it in the comments, I'd love to hear what you think. Did someone shock you like Timmy shocked Karen? Let's share some fun ideas together. This adventure with Timmy and his bird feeder is over, but there's more where that came from. Stick with me, and I'll bring you another story soon, one that's just as exciting and full of surprises. Keep watching, keep guessing, and keep believing that even the littlest things can turn into something huge. Like Timmy showed us, you never know who's got a secret up their sleeve or a bird feeder that's more than it seems. See you next time, friends. Let's keep the fun going.